On May 28, 2016, what should have been an ordinary day at the Cincinnati Zoo turned into a worldwide debate that still echoes today. A 4-year-old boy, Isaiah Dickerson, managed to slip past the barriers of the gorilla enclosure, leading to a chain of events that no one could have predicted. Unfortunately, this led to the death of Harambe, a 17-year-old 400-pound Western lowland silverback gorilla, sparking outrage, arguments, and even internet memes. Isaiah's parents, Dayon Dickerson and Michelle Gregg, were with a group of children at the zoo. As they were about to leave the gorilla exhibit, Isaiah had a sudden burst of curiosity, declaring his dream of swimming with the gorillas. While his mother was busy keeping an eye on the other kids, Isaiah saw his golden opportunity and made his move. In a matter of seconds, he managed to climb over the barrier and plummet 10 feet into the enclosure's moat. A loud splash was followed by someone screaming, "Oh my God, there's a kid in there!" Panic quickly spread as visitors gasped at the shocking sight. Isaiah, now sitting in front of a massive gorilla, and not just any gorilla, Harambe. Video footage later revealed the tense moments that followed. Harambe dragged Isaiah through the water by his leg, while the crowd screamed in terror. Yet, at times, the interaction seemed almost gentle. Some onlookers believed Harambe was protecting the child, even standing guard over him and at one point appearing to hold hands with Isaiah. However, Cincinnati Zoo director Thane Maynard later explained that the gorilla was growing agitated by the chaotic environment. Though Harambe wasn't attacking Isaiah, his sheer strength and size made the situation extremely unpredictable. The zoo's dangerous animal response team was faced with an agonizing choice: how to save Isaiah without further escalating the situation. They ultimately decided to fatally shoot Harambe, determining that a tranquilizer would take too long to act and could make Harambe react unpredictably. The decision sent shockwaves across the world. The public erupted in anger, with many questioning whether the killing was truly necessary. Animal rights activists and outraged citizens quickly mobilized, launching the online petition Justice for Harambe, which gathered over 350,000 signatures. Criticism wasn't just directed at the zoo. Isaiah's parents faced an onslaught of blame, particularly Michelle Gregg, who was accused of negligence. Social media was ablaze with furious posts, with some demanding an investigation into the family. Things got even messier when Isaiah's father, Dayon Dickerson, was dragged into the controversy. News outlets dug into his past, revealing a history of burglary and drug-related charges. Some critics used this as fuel to further vilify the parents, while others defended Dayon, arguing that he had turned his life around and was a committed father. Close friends vouched for him, describing him as a man who had left his troubled past behind to focus on his family. In the wake of the backlash, Isaiah's family released a statement expressing their gratitude to the zoo for acting swiftly, acknowledging the difficulty of the decision. "We know this was not easy for them, and they are grieving the loss of Harambe," they stated. Despite the mounting pressure, the family chose to remain silent afterward, declining all interview requests. Meanwhile, the Cincinnati Zoo stood firmly by its decision. Director Maynard emphasized that protecting Isaiah was their top priority, and that tranquilizing Harambe would have put the child at greater risk. However, this tragic event also cast a spotlight on the zoo's security measures. Critics questioned whether the gorilla enclosure was truly safe if a 4-year-old could breach it so easily. This led to increased scrutiny, especially after reports emerged of previous safety lapses at the zoo, including an incident where 2 polar bears had briefly escaped their enclosure. Harambe's death also became a rallying cry for animal rights organizations. The group Stop Animal Exploitation Now, Say Ian, filed a complaint with the USDA, arguing that the zoo had violated the Animal Welfare Act. If a 4-year-old child can get through the barrier, is that a safe barrier? Questioned Sayan spokesperson Michael Budke. Public mourning for Harambe quickly took on a life of its own. Social media flooded with tributes, and a Facebook group titled Justice for Harambe gained thousands of members in record time. For many, Harambe became a symbol of the complex and often troubled relationship between humans and captive animals. But while the world mourned his loss, a small piece of Harambe lived on, his genetic legacy. Though he had not yet reached full maturity or bred, his sperm was collected posthumously for potential future use. In the early hours of December 17, 2024, a shocking and deeply tragic incident occurred at Lion Park, a private zoo nestled in the Parkent district of Uzbekistan's Tashkent region. F. Iriskulov, a 44-year-old zookeeper working the night shift, was found dead inside the lion enclosure in what turned out to be one of the most horrifying animal-related incidents in the country in recent years. According to reports from investigators and local media, the entire event unfolded between 5 and 9 in the morning, during a time when the zoo was still closed to the public and only a handful of staff were on site. At some point in the early morning, Iriskulov entered the lion enclosure. It's still not entirely clear what prompted him to do so, but various accounts suggest he may have been attempting to record a video with the lions, potentially as a way to impress his fiancée. This speculation emerged after investigators reviewed his phone and found that he may have been trying to capture footage of himself close to the animals. However, it's also possible that he was simply trying to interact with them, perhaps assuming that familiarity and routine would protect him. Unfortunately, his decision coincided with a critical safety failure. The cage door had reportedly been left unsecured, allowing 3 lions to access the outer yard freely. When Iriskulov entered the enclosure, he was not dealing with sleepy, tame creatures. These were full-grown lions, strong, unpredictable, and extremely dangerous. As he tried to approach or redirect them, one or more of the lions turned aggressive. He was attacked, mauled, and ultimately killed. Investigators later confirmed that his body had been partially consumed, and initial forensic reports estimated the attack happened just minutes after he entered. With no other staff nearby at the time, there was no one to intervene. His remains were only discovered hours later by a colleague arriving for the morning shift at around 9 a.m. The response was immediate. Emergency services and law enforcement were called to the scene, and a criminal investigation was opened under Uzbekistan's labor and workplace safety regulations. 2 of the lions were quickly located and tranquilized by specialists from the Tashkent Zoo. The 3rd lion, however, had become extremely aggressive and was shot and killed by a local hunter who had been brought in to neutralize the threat. Officials also launched a full-scale inspection of Lion Park's facilities, enclosures, and operational procedures. Experts from the Ministry of Ecology were dispatched to conduct a thorough audit, including checks on all animal enclosures and staff training protocols. What raised further concern was the nature of Lion Park itself. Unlike traditional zoos, this facility operated as a contact zoo, where visitors and staff often had closer than usual access to the animals. These types of attractions, while popular for offering exotic animal encounters, walk a fine line when it comes to safety. Allowing untrained or minimally supervised personnel to interact directly with predators like lions is a recipe for disaster, as this incident painfully demonstrated. The case remains under investigation, with legal proceedings expected to focus on negligence, improper safety procedures, and potential breaches of animal handling regulations. Authorities are also reviewing whether the park should continue operating at all. For the public and for zoo professionals, the incident is a grim reminder of the fine line between fascination and folly. Wild animals, no matter how accustomed they may seem to human presence, are still wild. Respect, distance, and strict safety measures are not optional. They are essential, and when those lines are crossed, the consequences can be fatal. It was a warm summer day in Beijing, China, July 23, 2016 to be exact. Miss Jiao, a woman in her 30s, decided to take a family trip to the Beijing Badaling Wildlife Park, a popular spot where visitors can drive through enclosures and see wild animals up close. Along for the adventure were her mother, Miss Jiao's husband, and their child, all eager for a thrilling day among exotic creatures. As they cruised through the park, Miss Jiao started feeling carsick. Now, here's where things took a turn for the worse. Despite multiple warnings to stay in the car, seriously, they really stressed this rule. She decided she needed some fresh air. So, she stepped out and walked over to the driver's side to speak with her husband. Out of nowhere, a massive Siberian tiger lunged at her from behind, grabbing her and dragging her away from the vehicle. It was pure chaos. Seeing this horrifying scene unfold, Miss Zhao's mother instantly reacted. Without hesitation, she leaped out of the car and sprinted toward the tiger, desperately trying to save her daughter. But before she could reach her, another tiger appeared, and this time, the outcome was fatal. The attack was over in moments. Despite her husband's frantic attempts to intervene and the swift response of park rangers, Miss Jiao's mother was tragically killed. Miss Jiao herself survived but suffered severe injuries, leaving her with deep wounds and permanent disabilities. The shocking incident, captured partially on security cameras, quickly made headlines, sparking outrage and heated debates worldwide. In the aftermath, Miss Jiao and her family sued the Beijing Bottling Wildlife Park for 1.55 million yuan, about $218,000, seeking compensation for funeral costs, medical expenses, and their suffering. Miss Jiao admitted that stepping out of the car was a terrible mistake, but she argued that the park should have done more to prevent such tragedies. An official investigation was launched, examining whether the park's safety measures were up to standard. Officials determined that the tragedy resulted from the family's decision to leave the vehicle despite the very clear warnings. Signs were posted, precautions were in place, and park staff had repeatedly emphasized the rules. However, in response to the incident, the park temporarily shut down operations to review its safety protocols. They later implemented stricter measures, banning self-driving tours in the tiger enclosure and installing even more visible warning signs. But Miss Jiao wasn't satisfied. She insisted that the park's safety measures were still lacking. She claimed the risks hadn't been properly explained to visitors and argued that the agreement they signed upon entering the park wasn't fully understood. Her father backed her up, stating that the family had felt pressured into signing the waiver without a thorough explanation of the dangers. He believed the park should have taken greater responsibility in protecting its guests, especially in such a high-risk environment. The case quickly turned into a much bigger conversation about wildlife park safety. Were these parks truly doing enough to protect visitors from deadly encounters? Could stricter regulations prevent future tragedies? The park, on the other hand, stood its ground. They argued that they had followed all necessary safety procedures and that such attacks were incredibly rare. They stressed that wild animals remain unpredictable and that visitors must take personal responsibility for following the rules. As the court battle unfolded, it became clear that there were no easy answers. Miss Jiao and her family were determined to seek justice for her mother's tragic death and the trauma they had endured. Meanwhile, the park faced intense scrutiny, struggling to maintain a balance between visitor safety and providing an authentic wildlife experience. The outcome of the case would set a precedent, not just for wildlife parks in China, but potentially around the world. It highlighted the critical importance of clear communication and strict safety protocols to protect both visitors and the animals in these unique but dangerous environments. Let's rewind to a crisp November day in 2012 at the Pittsburgh Zoo and PPG Aquarium, a place where families go for laughs, awe, and maybe a few roars from behind the glass. Among the visitors that day were Elizabeth Durkosh and her 2-year-old son Maddox. Maddox wasn't just any kid, he was a curious, energetic little boy with a love for trucks and all things wild. Like many toddlers, he was fascinated by animals, and when the pair approached the African painted dog exhibit home to a pack of powerful, fast, and highly predatory canines, it must have felt like walking into a real-life jungle scene. What happened next still sends shivers down spines. Elizabeth, trying to help her son get a better look at the action, lifted him onto the railing. It was something countless parents have probably done in zoos around the world, hoisting a child up to see better, just for a moment. But that one moment turned into unimaginable horror. Maddox suddenly lost his balance, slipped, and fell first, bouncing off a net that was designed to catch dropped objects, not small children, and plunged nearly 14 feet into the enclosure below. Within seconds, the African painted dogs swarmed him. These animals, while smaller than lions or tigers, are efficient pack hunters with razor-sharp instincts. Zoo staff and first responders did what they could. Some tried to lure the dogs away. Others shouted and threw things to distract them. A police officer ultimately fired a shot, killing one of the dogs that refused to retreat. But it was tragically too late. The autopsy later revealed that Maddox had survived the fall, but died quickly from the severe injuries caused by the attack. The incident was both a heartbreaking accident and a lightning rod for controversy. The public reacted with a mix of grief, outrage, and finger-pointing. Was it the mother's fault? Was it a lapse in zoo safety? Should the enclosure have been designed differently? Allegheny County prosecutors ultimately ruled it a tragic accident and declined to file criminal charges, but that didn't stop a storm of civil litigation. Maddox's parents filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the zoo, citing past internal safety reports that had warned about visitors lifting children over railings, warnings that were reportedly not followed up with any design changes. In response, the zoo filed its own claim, arguing that the mother bore full responsibility for the fall. Eventually, a confidential settlement was reached, but the impact of that day went far beyond the courtroom. The African-painted dog exhibit was permanently shut down, and the dogs were relocated. The area was later transformed into a cheetah enclosure, perhaps a quieter, more controlled setting. In the midst of grief, something beautiful emerged. Maddox's family started a movement called Trucks for Maddox, where people donated toy trucks to children in hospitals and charities honoring the boy's love for his favorite toys. His memory, though tied to an unthinkable tragedy, lives on through the kindness of strangers and the changes made to prevent another accident like this. The story of Maddox Derkosh serves as a sobering reminder. Zoos, for all their fun and wonder, house wild animals, and even a momentary lapse can have irreversible consequences. It's a tale of love, loss, and the very human need to reflect and learn from tragedy, especially when innocent lives are involved. It was July 29, 1994, at the Alaska Zoo in Anchorage, a day that would go down in infamy. Enter Catherine Warburton, a 29-year-old tourist from Sydney, Australia, who had traveled all the way to Alaska for a taste of adventure. Armed with a camera and an insatiable passion for wildlife photography, she set her sights on the zoo's star attraction, Binky, a 1,200-pound polar bear with a reputation as both a local icon and a furry force of nature. Binky wasn't just any bear, he was a legend. Orphaned near Cape Beaufort in 1970, he had called the Alaska Zoo home for decades. As a cub, he had charmed villages across the North Slope, meeting children and basking in the limelight. But as he grew, so did his instincts. He wasn't just a cute zoo resident, he was a powerful predator. The proof? He once bit off a zoo worker's finger. Yet, despite his track record, visitors remained captivated by him. Catherine was no exception. Determined to get the ultimate close-up shot, Catherine made a decision that, in hindsight, was less brilliant photographer and more bad life choice. Ignoring every zoo safety guideline ever written, she climbed over not one, but two protective barriers. With her camera in hand and her confidence sky-high, she positioned herself just feet away from Binky's enclosure. Binky, the apex predator that he was, didn't need an invitation. In a flash, he lunged through the bars, clamping his massive jaws onto Catherine's thigh. Chaos erupted. She screamed. The crowd gasped. Binky, unfazed, held on like a bear possessed. Visitors rushed to help, waving sticks, shouting, and trying every bear distraction technique they could think of. Some called for a tranquilizer gun, but before it came to that, Binky decided he'd had enough. He let go, leaving Catherine with a broken leg, a severely bitten thigh, and a newfound appreciation for zoo barriers. From her hospital bed, Catherine reflected on the incident with brutal honesty. That was the dumbest thing I've ever done. Meanwhile, Binky, the undisputed king of the enclosure, basked in his newfound glory. The next day, a now iconic photo captured him proudly, holding Catherine's shoe in his mouth, as if it were a championship trophy. The image went viral before viral was even a thing. Binky's fame skyrocketed. He was no longer just a zoo bear, he was a sensation. T-shirts, mugs, and souvenirs featuring his victorious shoe moment flooded the gift shop. Slogans like, "Send another tourist," "This one got away," became instant classics. People debated the incident. Was Catherine to blame for ignoring the rules? Was Binky just being Binky? Either way, the world couldn't get enough of him. But Binky wasn't done making headlines. Just 6 weeks later, on September 11th, he found himself in another encounter. This time with a group of intoxicated teenagers who thought it'd be a fantastic idea to get up close and personal with a polar bear. One particularly unlucky 19-year-old got too close and was promptly mauled, suffering serious leg injuries. Though the zoo never confirmed Binky as the attacker, the bear was found with blood on his face, looking suspiciously pleased with himself. With 2 high-profile incidents under his belt, or rather, his fur, Binky became an international icon, but fame didn't shield him from tragedy. In 1995, his companion, Nuka, fell ill with a parasitic disease and died from liver failure. Soon after, Binky began showing similar symptoms. On July 20th, 1995, he suffered convulsions and passed away, marking the end of an era at the Alaska Zoo. It was a hot and hazy afternoon in September 2014 at the National Zoological Park in Delhi. The usual crowd of families, tourists, and snack-hunting monkeys filled the place. Kids were buzzing with excitement. Parents were trying to keep them from climbing into cages. And somewhere in the background, ice creams were melting faster than tempers. Amid this zoo, chaos walked a 20-year-old man named Maksud Khan. He was barefoot, wearing shabby clothes, and appeared disoriented. According to some witnesses, he had been wandering alone for a while, looking confused. Maksud ended up near the enclosure of one of the zoo's star attractions, a majestic male white tiger named Vijay. The tiger enclosure had a small barrier that looked more like a polite suggestion than an actual safety measure. With barely a waist-high fence to keep people back, it was practically an invitation to disaster. Whether Maksud climbed over intentionally or simply slipped is something no one could confirm with certainty. But in a matter of seconds, he found himself inside the enclosure, having fallen about 18 feet down into the dry moat that separated humans from one of nature's most formidable predators. What followed was a scene straight out of a surreal movie. The tiger approached slowly, not immediately aggressive, just alert and curious. For a tense few minutes, the giant cat and the terrified man stared at each other. Maksud crouched against the wall of the moat, frozen with fear. People above began screaming. Some yelled at the tiger, some threw rocks and sticks, probably thinking they were helping. Others did what 21st century people often do during a crisis. They pulled out their phones and started filming. It was absolute mayhem. But for Vijay the tiger, the situation had shifted. The loud noises, the flying debris, the agitation from above all of it seemed to trigger his instincts. Within moments, he pounced. The crowd erupted in horror as the white tiger attacked Maksud with terrifying speed and force. Some reports said the tiger dragged him around for several minutes. Others claimed the death was almost instantaneous. Either way, zoo officials failed to respond in time to prevent the tragedy. By the time help arrived, Maksud was already dead. The public outrage that followed was immediate and intense. People questioned how anyone could access a tiger enclosure so easily. Many wondered why the zoo had such low safety railings, especially around a predator's exhibit. Others criticized the staff for having no tranquilizer guns ready or emergency protocol in place. It became a storm of accusations, debates, and sensational media coverage. Some reports painted Maksud as mentally ill and vulnerable, someone who had fallen through the cracks of society. Others portrayed him as reckless or suicidal. But beyond the speculation, one truth stood tall: the zoo had failed on multiple levels to protect both the animal and the visitor. Surprisingly, the white tiger was not harmed in the aftermath. Animal rights groups stepped in immediately, reminding everyone that Vijay was simply reacting as any wild animal would. He had not escaped. He had not attacked unprovoked. He was in his home, and a human had trespassed into it. The authorities agreed, and the tiger was spared. He remained at the zoo, still majestic, still deadly, and now even more famous. This incident forced a national conversation about zoo safety standards, mental health awareness, and our fascination with wild animals. It became a grim reminder that no matter how many signs we post or fences we build, the wild does not forgive human error. Maksud Khan's death was a tragedy that could have been prevented with stronger barriers, better planning, and a lot more attention to public safety. His story, captured on shaky phone cameras and broadcast to the world, remains a haunting example of what happens when human negligence meets raw, unfiltered nature. The summer of 2024 was supposed to be a bucket list adventure for Lisa Manders and her husband, Craig. The New Jersey couple had packed their bags, full of excitement, for an African safari in Zambia. But what started as a dream vacation quickly spiraled into a nightmare that Craig would never wake up from. On June 5th, Lisa, a mother of 3 and a respected financial professional, joined her husband and a group of tourists on a guided bushwalk. Led by experienced guides, they set off toward a riverbank, where a hulking hippopotamus lurked just beneath the surface. Hippos may look like chubby, oversized bathtub toys, but in reality, they're one of the deadliest creatures in the wild. Territorial, aggressive, and capable of launching into a full-speed charge faster than you can say, "bad idea." Despite the danger, the group was encouraged to observe from close range, reassured that everything was under control. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. 1 second, all was calm. The next, chaos erupted. The hippo lifted its head, paused for a split second, almost like it was sizing up its next move, and then exploded from the water with the force of a freight train. Lisa turned to flee, but there was no outrunning a rampaging hippo. In a heartbeat, the massive beast lunged, its gigantic jaws clamping down on her with a force that shattered bones instantly. She was lifted clean off the ground, flung around like a rag doll. Her screams echoed through the air. Craig could do nothing but watch in horror as his wife was mauled to death before his eyes. His dream safari had turned into a waking nightmare. In the aftermath, Craig was left with unimaginable grief and a burning question. How could this have happened? He has since filed a lawsuit against African Portfolio, the Connecticut-based tour company that organized the trip, accusing them of gross negligence. According to Craig, they were never warned about just how dangerous hippos could be on foot, nor were proper safety precautions taken. Had we known the risks, we never would have gone near that hippo, Craig stated through his attorneys. The idea that we were left so vulnerable that Lisa had no protection between her and such a deadly animal is mind-blowing. African Portfolio, however, has denied responsibility. Their attorney, Rod Gould, brushed off the lawsuit, claiming the company simply arranges trips and can't be held accountable for what happens during them. My client is a tour operator. We arrange vacations. If a traveler's airline loses their luggage, that's not our fault, he argued. But for Craig and his devastated family, this wasn't just a freak accident. It was a preventable tragedy. Lisa Manders wasn't just another unlucky tourist. She was a loving wife, a devoted mother, and a bright light extinguished far too soon. Lisa was the best wife and mother anyone could ever ask for, Craig said, his voice heavy with grief. Her violent death is a heartbreaking loss not just for our family but for everyone who knew her. Her story serves as a chilling reminder that nature isn't a theme park. In the wild, the line between awe-inspiring and absolutely terrifying can vanish in an instant. For those dreaming of safari adventures, Lisa's fate stands as a stark warning. The wilderness doesn't play by human rules, and getting too close to nature's deadliest creatures can have devastating consequences. It's not every day that you hear about a fatal kangaroo attack in the United States. In fact, it's almost unheard of, but that's exactly what happened in May 2025 in Loris, South Carolina. A 52-year-old man named Eric Slate tragically lost his life after an encounter with a kangaroo at a local petting zoo. It sounds like something pulled from a strange headline generator, but it's a very real and sobering reminder of how unpredictable and dangerous even tame animals can be. The incident took place at 5 Star Farms, a family-run petting zoo where visitors could interact with animals like goats, wallabies, and, yes, kangaroos. Eric Slate wasn't just any visitor, he was the brother of the zoo's owner, Robert Slate, and had spent plenty of time around the animals. According to local reports, Eric had previously gone into the kangaroo enclosure multiple times, sometimes engaging in light roughhousing with one of the farm's resident kangaroos, a large red kangaroo affectionately known by locals as Mr. Jack. But on the night of May 9th, things took a tragic turn. At some point that evening, Eric entered the enclosure again, presumably thinking it would be just another playful interaction. Unfortunately, it wasn't. When he didn't return for some time, others went to check on him. That's when his body was discovered inside the pen, lifeless, with clear signs of trauma. The Horry County coroner later confirmed that. Eric had died from multiple blunt force injuries consistent with an animal attack. While authorities didn't explicitly say the kangaroo was the attacker, the circumstances made it heartbreakingly obvious. Kangaroos, while often seen as quirky, hopping mascots of Australia, can be incredibly strong and territorial, especially the big males. They're built like bodybuilders with legs that can shatter bones and claws that can do real damage if they feel threatened. And in this case, what was probably meant to be harmless fun may have been interpreted by the kangaroo as a challenge or threat. The news shocked both locals and people across the country, not just for the tragedy itself, but because of how incredibly rare such incidents are. In fact, fatal kangaroo attacks are almost non-existent in the US, and even in Australia, where kangaroos outnumber people, deaths from these marsupials are staggeringly rare. The last confirmed kangaroo-related death in Australia happened back in 1936. The farm quickly came under scrutiny. Authorities began inspecting the enclosures, evaluating animal safety, and conducting a full investigation to make sure no negligence had occurred. But Robert Slate, the owner and grieving brother, assured the public that the animals were secure and there was no danger to visitors. The kangaroo involved wasn't euthanized and remains at the farm, now the quiet center of a deeply unfortunate story. This incident sparked a broader conversation about exotic animal ownership, petting zoo safety, and how even well-meaning interactions with wild animals can end unpredictably. It's easy to forget that animals like kangaroos, even when raised in captivity, still have instincts that don't always mix well with human playfulness. Eric Slate's death is a tragic loss that left his family and community reeling. And while it may sound surreal, it serves as a powerful reminder. Wild animals, no matter how familiar they may seem, deserve our respect, not our roughhousing. It was a peaceful evening in May 2018. The kind where the air hums with the sounds of the wild, and the stars twinkle over Uganda's Queen Elizabeth National Park. At Ma Safari Lodge, everything seemed perfectly normal, until it wasn't. What unfolded next was the stuff of nightmares, a real-life horror story that sent chills down the spines of an entire community. A 2-year-old boy, full of boundless energy and innocent curiosity, toddled just a little too far from safety. He had been following his nanny, his tiny steps unnoticed in the dim evening light. And then, bam, the jungle, always watching, always waiting, decided to show its brutal side. A leopard, silent and patient, had been lurking in the shadows. It saw an opportunity, and in a heartbeat it pounced. Before the nanny could even process what was happening, the beast had clamped its powerful jaws around the little boy and vanished into the darkness. One moment, the child was there, laughing, playing. The next, he was gone. A scream shattered the night. The nanny spun around, her heart pounding in terror, just in time to see the monstrous feline dragging the helpless toddler into the thick brush. Without a second thought, she ran after them, fueled by desperation, fear, and sheer adrenaline. But the jungle doesn't play fair. The leopard had disappeared, melting into the wild like a ghost, leaving nothing behind but echoes of panic. What followed was a frantic search. Rangers, villagers, and the child's devastated family scoured the dense undergrowth, calling his name, praying for a miracle. But the jungle remained silent. Hours passed, stretching into what felt like an eternity, and then came the cruelest discovery of all. At dawn, beneath a tree, the grim reality was laid bare. The child's remains, his tiny skull and a few scattered bones, were all that was left. The leopard had not only taken him, but had fed on him. The tragedy hit like a hammer to the heart. This wasn't just an accident, it was raw, merciless, and gut-wrenching. The boy's mother, a game ranger at the park, had been on duty when her son was stolen away by the very wildlife she had sworn to protect. His father, Francis Manena Nabugier, was shattered beyond words. His voice, hollow with grief, echoed the pain of every parent's worst nightmare. "You gave us the coffin," he said. "My son is gone. Nothing will bring him back." But grief alone wasn't enough. He needed answers. He needed to understand how such a horrific event could happen in a place where people were supposed to feel safe. The Uganda Wildlife Authority, scrambling for damage control, faced a chilling truth. The leopard had now tasted human blood. And when a predator gets a taste for something once, it might come back for more. Spokesman Bashir Hangi didn't sugarcoat it. "We are working towards tracking it down," he admitted. "It is not good to keep it there." Translation: this leopard had just been upgraded to public enemy number 1. The attack sent shockwaves across Uganda. Sure, the occasional leopard sighting was expected, but a full-blown, child-snatching, bloodthirsty attack, that was something out of a horror movie. This was not just another tragic wildlife encounter. It was a living nightmare. A child, stolen by a predator from the very place that was meant to be his home. It was almost too much to comprehend. As the search for the leopard continued, one thing became terrifyingly clear. In the wild, there are no second chances. A single misstep, a fleeting moment of distraction, and nature takes what it wants. No warnings, no mercy, no turning back. Zoos are usually places of laughter, school trips, and awkward penguin photos, not biblical reenactments gone tragically wrong. But on May 21, 2016, the Santiago Metropolitan Zoo in Chile became the scene of a deeply unsettling and controversial incident. A 20-year-old man named Franco Luis Ferrada climbed into the lion enclosure in what appeared to be a suicide attempt, or, as some speculated, a religiously fueled delusion. What followed was a chain of events that shook the country, sparked international outrage, and raised tough questions about mental health, animal rights, and emergency protocols. It began like something out of a surreal novel. Ferrada reportedly stripped naked, climbed over a safety barrier, and entered the enclosure housing 3 lions. Witnesses later said he shouted religious phrases and seemed to believe he was reenacting the biblical story of Daniel, the guy who hung out with lions and walked away without a scratch. Sadly, this wasn't a Sunday school tale. The lions, behaving as lions do, attacked Ferrada almost immediately. Zookeepers were thrown into a horrible dilemma. Tranquilizers take time to work, and Ferrada's life was in immediate danger. With no time to spare, the zoo staff made a decision they later called devastating but necessary. They fatally shot 2 of the lions, a male and a female, who had been long-term residents of the zoo. A third lioness managed to retreat and survived. Ferrada was critically injured, suffering severe trauma to his head, chest, and pelvis, but he lived. He was placed in a medically induced coma and later began a slow recovery. The aftermath was an emotional firestorm. Chileans were heartbroken and furious, not necessarily at Ferrada, but at the fact that 2 beloved animals had been killed to save a man who had willingly put himself in harm's way. Animal rights activists staged protests outside the zoo, held candlelight vigils, and demanded accountability. Some called for better mental health support systems, others for improved zoo security, or even the closure of the facility altogether. Ferrada's backstory added layers to the tragedy. He had reportedly struggled with his mental health and carried a note referencing apocalyptic visions and divine destiny signed Jesus. It painted a picture of a young man in profound distress, lost in a dangerous delusion. The incident reignited debates about how society handles mental illness, particularly when it leads to public crises with irreversible consequences. Meanwhile, the zoo, already under scrutiny for previous incidents involving animal welfare, found itself in hot water. Critics slammed its emergency protocols, questioned the adequacy of its security barriers, and called for reforms in how zoos handle both people and animals in high-risk situations. The zoo director defended the actions taken, emphasizing that staff did everything they could to save a human life, but admitted the emotional toll was massive. "We are deeply affected," she said. "We had to sacrifice 2 animals that were part of our family." In the end, the Santiago Zoo incident was more than just a bizarre headline. It was a tragic convergence of mental illness, human error, and institutional pressure. 2 majestic animals lost their lives, a young man nearly died, and an entire nation was left wrestling with what the right decision even means in a moment of chaos. It's a haunting reminder that real life doesn't always give us neat answers, just hard questions, and hopefully, the resolve to do better next time.